The movie starts on Christmas night with people decorating their homes. Manel is at his sister's house with his wife, playing with his nephew. As night falls, he puts his nephew to bed, says goodbye to his sister, and leaves with his wife. While his wife is driving, Manel notices she's upset. He asks what's wrong, and she says she wants a baby. Manel agrees but says, "Not now. The right time will come." His wife gets angry and they start arguing. At that moment, another car overtakes them, causing their car to lose control. His wife manages to regain control, but then a truck crashes into their car, flipping it over. Manel survives, but his wife dies in the accident. 1 year later, Manel lives alone in a large house with his cat. He learns that a dangerous virus is spreading across the country and borders may close. Infected people become violent, like zombies, and attack others. Though the virus is under control, Manel doesn't pay much attention to it. He's still grieving over his wife's death, so he goes out to the city in his car. Signs around the city read, "Welcome to the beginning of the end." Manel visits the seaside where his wife has bought a boat, which he plans to sell. On his way back, he misses a call from his sister, Belen. He doesn't answer and stops at a store where people are panic buying supplies, fearing a lockdown. Back at home, Manel calls his sister. She tells him that because her husband is in the army, they're being sent to an island for safety. She insists that Manel come with them. After some hesitation, he agrees and heads to the airport the next morning, taking his cat with him. On the way, he hears on the news about a new variant of the virus spreading faster. At the airport, there's a long line, but the flight to the island gets canceled due to the virus. Belen calls again to say that the airport is closing and all flights are canceled. She tells Manel to go home and stay indoors. On his way back, Manel encounters heavy traffic and decides to walk home with his cat. When Manel arrives, he's shocked to see the army surrounding his neighbor's house, taking him away because he's infected with the virus. The next morning, Belen calls to warn him about worsening conditions. She tells him not to go to the government's safe zone because it may be more dangerous there. On the news, Manel learns that the borders are closed and videos of the virus's transmission are spreading. The government sends an emergency message saying all markets will close soon. Manel rushes to the store to buy food, but it's been emptied by others. While leaving, Manel sees an infected person attacking the police. He tries to help, but is attacked by the infected person. The officer shoots the infected person, but after a cut, the officer too becomes infected and kills himself to prevent harming others. Back home, Manel locks up his house tightly, preparing for whatever comes next. The network is shut down, and the army arrives with a bus to take people to the safe zone. But Manel hides, not wanting to be taken. 2 weeks later, Manel is completely alone. He makes a video for his sister, telling her that he's fine, but running out of food. He tries to send the video, but the network is down. Fearing he'll die from hunger before the virus, Manel grabs his weapons and sets out in search of food. He checks several houses but finds nothing to eat. Manel traveled far from his house in search of food. At one house, he met an elderly woman in a wheelchair because her legs didn't work. He thought he'd find food there, but there was none. The old woman told him she had been keeping an eye on some other houses where food might be, so Manel decided to check them out. He found food at those houses, and they ate to satisfy their hunger. The old woman said it would have been better if he had gone with the army, because if they had no food, they might have killed each other out of hunger. Manel replied that they shouldn't lose hope, and that he would continue searching for more food. Later, he found a house with a lot of food and brought it back home. That night, both of them were happy after filling their stomachs. Manel shared a story about his wife, saying it was better she had died. They were struggling for food now, and he couldn't help but feel the loss. He made a video for his sister, hoping to send it when the network was back. Then he went to sleep. Suddenly, he heard the old woman on the walkie-talkie telling him to turn on the radio. The radio broadcasted an announcement from the government, urging survivors to come to the safe zone for help. The old woman was skeptical, fearing the infection would spread in such a crowd. Manel said they needed to go because food was running out. She refused, saying she couldn't go because of her wheelchair. Manel promised to help her and take her with him. The next morning, Manel packed his things and went to the old woman's house, but he found that she had passed away from taking too much medicine. She left a note thanking him for caring for her and saying she didn't want to be a burden anymore. Heartbroken, Manel left the house alone. On his way, an infected woman attacked him, but he managed to push her off and shoot her to protect himself. He felt bad about it but left a message for his sister, saying the infected were now on the streets. He couldn't wait for her to come for him. He was going to the safe zone alone. He headed to the safe zone, but the roads were blocked, so he rode through the jungle, with infected people following him. He eventually reached the camp, but to his horror, he saw piles of dead bodies everywhere. The people who had arrived at the camp were all dead from the infection. While trying to start his bike again, Manel's bike fell, and his cat's box was knocked over. He couldn't get the bike to start, so he grabbed the box with his cat and ran through the jungle, pursued by infected people. He found a building, locked himself in, and heard the infected pounding on the door. He escaped through the back and saw a small ship, but it was covered in blood. When he opened the door to the cabin, he found a baby inside, infected and looking weak. Manel thought about the situation as he looked at the infected child. He had already killed many to survive, but he couldn't bring himself to harm a child. He decided to take a small boat from the ship and leave. As he traveled, he messaged his sister, Balan, telling her she was right not to go to the safe zone because things were bad there. Many people had died, and some had become infected. That night, Manel saw the bodies of infected people floating in the water. Suddenly, a small ship appeared, and Manel signaled for it to stop. The people on board pointed a gun at him, but once he assured them he wasn't infected, they let him aboard. He was taken to a bigger ship, where he was fed. On the ship, there were 3 people: the pilot, the captain, and the captain's son. The pilot gave Manel a cabin to sleep in, and Manel asked if he was the only one still alive. The pilot said yes, he was the first. As Manel rested in his cabin, he looked out the window and saw a family approaching the ship. The next morning, Manel asked the pilot about the family he had seen the night before. The pilot claimed no one had come to the ship, which made Manel suspicious. He began to pay more attention to everything around him. He confronted the pilot, asking why he was on the ship and if there were planes and helicopters nearby. The pilot became angry and told him to mind his own business if he wanted to stay alive. Feeling uneasy, Manel decided to leave the ship that night. When he went to the basement, he found the family tied up with bandages on their mouths. He freed them, asking where their woman and child were, but they didn't know. Before he could get more answers, one of the captain's men appeared with a gun and threatened him. Just as the man was about to shoot, the pilot arrived and killed the captain's man. The pilot scolded Manel for getting involved and warned him to stay out of it. Manel managed to escape the ship in a small boat, but the captain's men saw him and started shooting. One of the people they had just saved was killed, and the pilot was injured. Manel took the pilot to a nearby hospital where he hoped to find a helicopter. On the way, Manel asked the pilot about the family's woman and child. The pilot explained that the captain was a cruel man who saved people only to take them to the island, where he turned the dead into slaves and mistreated women. Manel was furious after hearing this. He said that when the situation improved, those who took advantage of others in their time of trouble should be punished. Upon arriving at the hospital, Manel rushed inside, hoping to find a helicopter. But what he saw shocked him. The hospital was abandoned, with blood everywhere. Manel had no choice but to take matters into his own hands. He killed anyone who was still there. The pilot, injured and in pain, urged Manel to remove the bullet from his wound. Manel wasn't trained to do such things, but with no choice, he managed to help the pilot. While doing so, another infected person attacked him. Manel killed the infected person, but realized that he too was now infected. He told the nurse to take care of the children, but as he left, more infected people began to chase him. A nurse came to his aid and led him to a safer area where there were no infected people. Along with the nurse were a doctor and 3 children. Manel went to another room to remove the bullet from his injury, and when he returned, he told the nurse that the pilot would be fine after some time. Manel told the nurse that there were helicopters at the hospital, but the area was surrounded by infected people, making it dangerous to get there. The nurse agreed but said that the helicopter was at the bottom of the hospital and they would have to find a way to avoid the infection. Manel thought about the time when he had brought his wife to this hospital after their accident. Sadly, his wife had died, and he had never had the chance to apologize for not listening to her sooner. As Manel went upstairs to figure out how to get to the helicopter, his phone began to ring. He had received several messages and the network was back. His sister Balan had sent him a video, saying they had reached the island and were doing well. Manel was about to reply when the sound of gunfire interrupted him. Some goons had arrived at the hospital in search of food. Manel rushed downstairs and warned the nurse and others that they needed to get to the helicopter before the goons did. He led them forward, avoiding the infected people along the way. But then an infected person attacked the doctor. Manel killed it, but he couldn't help but worry that he was infected too. He told the nurse to take care of the children while he dealt with the infected. As Manel continued to lead them toward the helicopter, he used his quick thinking. He saw some barricades and tires nearby, and he used them to create a circle for protection. Unfortunately, one of the tires got stuck, making a loud noise, which attracted more infected people. Manel fought them off with an axe, but there were too many of them. The nurse, realizing they had no time, opened a barricade and ran with the children to the helicopter. Manel and the pilot made it to the helicopter just as the goons arrived. They fought the infected and the goons, but they couldn't let the helicopter escape. Manel broke open a gate, allowing the infected to enter the helicopter area. The goons got distracted by the infected, giving Manel and the pilot the chance to start the helicopter. With the help of the nurse, Manel climbed aboard the helicopter just as it lifted off. As they flew toward the island, Manel called his sister, telling her they were about to land. But Balan warned him that the island wasn't safe anymore, and there were infected people there too. Manel's phone cut off, but he landed the helicopter anyway. The film ends with Manel ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead, determined to protect his loved ones.